Years after they married, her husband forbade her from returning to his hometown to visit his mother's house, with the excuse that it was being renovated. One day, she received the news that her mother-in-law had died a month ago. When he had to leave town for work, she decided to secretly travel to the town to see the house that Mrs. Rose, her mother-in-law, had left behind. But as soon as she opened the door, she froze. Her body trembled, the air caught in her chest, and she understood that what lay behind that door was far darker than she could have ever imagined. Before we begin the story, please, I ask you to write in the comments what city you're listening from, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel. This helps me keep growing and bring you more and more impactful stories. Continuing with the tale, no one suspected that this story was actually Sarah's life. She had been married to Mark for 8 years. 8 years that, if you looked at them from the outside, seemed quite good. They lived in a comfortable house on the outskirts of the city. Mark worked as a regional manager for a logistics company, a stable position with a good salary. And Sarah, a gentle woman who wore a headscarf, had decided to dedicate herself completely to the home after getting married. Her life seemed like what many would envy. Bills paid, a tidy house, a marriage without yelling or scandals. However, behind that calm facade, there was a thorn in Sarah's heart, a single place that for her remained a closed door. The house of Mrs. Rose, Mark's mother, in the town of Hope Creek. In 8 years of marriage, Sarah had only seen her mother-in-law 3 times, twice at the beginning when Mrs. Rose traveled to the city to meet her, and a 3rd time in the first year of their marriage when they went to the town. Sarah remembered Mrs. Rose as a rather quiet woman, with a soft and serene gaze. She didn't talk much, but the way she stroked her back when she hugged her felt deeply sincere. Sarah longed to get to know the woman who had brought the man she loved into the world, to build a relationship of affection and trust with her. But from the 2nd year of marriage, that door closed. For 7 years, every time Sarah suggested going to Hope Creek to visit Mrs. Rose, Mark gave the same answer. Mom's house is in the middle of a major remodel, honey. There's a lot of construction. We'd better wait until they're finished. The first time, the explanation sounded reasonable. Mark told her that the house left to his mother after his father's death was very old, rotten beams, serious leaks, foundations that needed reinforcing. As an only child, he felt completely responsible. I want Mom to live her final years in a decent house, he told her. Sarah felt proud to have such an attentive and good son. She supported him without reservation. The first year, the excuse fit. The second, Sarah began to wonder what kind of renovation could possibly take so long. Mark added new problems. It turns out the land is bad. We had to redo part of the work. And the construction workers are a disaster. They never meet their deadlines. He would grumble with a tone of annoyance that made Sarah feel guilty for insisting. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th year, that renovation became a bitter joke that only she heard. Every time the Eid al-Fitr celebration came around, Sarah would prepare the best gift for Mrs. Rose. But Mark was always the one who took it alone. This way I can keep an eye on the workers. Besides, the trip is long, you'd get tired. It's very dusty there, and that's not good for your breathing, he would say sweetly. Sarah, obedient by nature, would just nod and send her warmest regards to her mother-in-law. Over time, she stopped asking, not because she didn't care, but because every question hit the same wall. The endless renovation. Mark's resistance to going into detail created a subtle but constant distance between them. In everything else, he remained a good husband, attentive, always calling when he traveled, never neglecting her needs. But as soon as Sarah mentioned Mrs. Rose or the house in the town, Mark became secretive and defensive, as if someone had suddenly switched off the light in his eyes. For a while, Sarah tried to keep in touch with Mrs. Rose by phone. At first, her mother-in-law would answer. Her voice sounded weak but affectionate. Every time Sarah asked when they could come visit, Mrs. Rose would reply with a resigned whisper, "Ask Mark, dear. I do whatever he says." But in the last 2 years, that number stopped answering. Her cell phone broke. You know, she's older. It's hard for her to learn how to use a new one. Besides, there's barely any signal in the town, Mark explained. Again, it sounded logical, but something in Sarah's stomach tightened every time she heard it. It was like smelling smoke without seeing the fire. The suspicion exploded 3 months before the lawyer's visit. That day, in the middle of a drought, The city air was dry and full of dust. Mark had just returned from one of his work trips, which included a visit to Hope Creek to check, as he said, on the progress of the renovation. He arrived late at night, exhausted. Sarah went to the door to help him take off his shoes, as she always did. As she took his leather loafers, she froze. They weren't covered in dust, but in red mud, wet and thick, as if he had walked through a muddy field after a heavy rain. "Mark, where did you step in so much mud?" she asked gently, trying to keep her voice neutral. Mark, who was loosening his tie, stood motionless. The weariness on his face tensed up, and his eyes fixed on the shoes for a second before looking away. "Oh, it was at a friend's construction site near Mom's house. Work stuff," he replied too quickly. "But we're in a drought. Where would this fresh mud come from?" Sarah insisted, not meaning to accuse him, just confused. For the first time in 8 years, he yelled at her. "Why are you so distrustful? I come home exhausted from working all day and you interrogate me over a pair of shoes. Have I ever lied to you about anything? I only go to the town for my mother. Do you think I enjoy going back and forth? You should appreciate my efforts more." His voice was harsh, sharp. Sarah felt her eyes well up with tears. He had never spoken to her like that. She set the shoes down with trembling hands. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Just leave it," he interrupted, going into the bathroom and closing the door. That night, Sarah slept with her back to him. She cried silently, not so much because of the shouting, but because of the taste of a lie in Mark's answer. He was hiding something big that had to do with the town, with Mrs. Rose, and with that eternal renovation that had built an invisible wall between her and her husband's family. She understood for the first time that her marriage was not as fine as she kept telling herself. It had a deep crack, and that crack was in that house in the town that no one would let her see. The following days, everything seemed to return to normal, but it was a forced normality. After the incident with the shoes, Mark became especially attentive. He bought her a new tunic, took her to an expensive restaurant for dinner, showered her with compliments and gifts. Sarah accepted it all with a pale smile. She knew it was his way of apologizing, of covering a crack he himself had opened with presents. She allowed it, not because she was convinced, but because she felt too exhausted to argue. She began to watch him in silence with a newfound clarity, as if she were living with a stranger who she urgently needed to decipher. One Saturday morning, while Sarah was arranging some homemade pastries on a tray in the kitchen, Mark was reading the newspaper on the terrace. The day was quiet until a car horn broke the silence. Sarah looked out the window and saw a gleaming black sedan stop in front of the house. She didn't recognize the car. A very well-dressed man in a gray suit and a leather briefcase got out. He checked his phone screen to confirm the address and rang the doorbell. Sarah adjusted her headscarf and walked towards the door, just as Mark stood up, frowning. "Who are you looking for, sir?" Mark asked with tense politeness. "Good morning. Are you Mr. Mark?" "Yes, that's me." "Allow me to introduce myself. I am Mr. Ramirez from the law firm Ramirez & Associates. I'm here on an important matter related to—" He paused, glancing at Sarah, who was watching from behind her husband, Mrs. Rose. Sarah's heart sank. Hearing her mother-in-law's name from a lawyer could not mean anything good. Mark turned pale instantly. The composure he usually showed fell from his face like a paper mask. "What's wrong with my mother?" he asked, his voice cracking. "We should probably talk inside," the lawyer suggested. "It's a very private matter." Mark, rigid, led him in. Sarah followed him with cold hands. In the living room, she hurried to bring them water, though her hands trembled so much that the glasses clinked on the tray. When she returned, Mr. Ramirez had already begun. "Mr. Mark, Mrs. Sarah," he said in a formal tone, "I am here as the legal representative appointed by Mrs. Rose, your mother. May she rest in peace." Sarah almost dropped the tray. "Rest in peace," she whispered, as if the words couldn't be real. She looked at Mark, searching for an explanation, but he was motionless, his gaze fixed on the table. The lawyer took a deep breath. "I'm very sorry. Mrs. Rose passed away 32 days ago at the town hospital due to acute kidney failure. According to the written instructions she left me, I was to contact you, Mr. Mark, as the sole heir, exactly 30 days after her passing to discuss the matter of the inheritance. His voice was neutral, almost as if he were reading the weather report. Sarah's ears were ringing. 32 days, more than a month. Her mother-in-law had died, and she knew nothing. The daughter-in-law hadn't been at the funeral or the wake, hadn't even recited a prayer for her on the day she died. It was an absence that weighed like guilt. Mark seemed to crumble. He covered his face with both hands and began to sob. His shoulders shook. The crying seemed heart-wrenching. Sarah looked at him coldly. She found it hard to believe. She had seen his lies before. Mr. Ramirez, uncomfortable, opened his briefcase and took out a thick brown envelope and a keychain with several old keys. "Mr. Mark," he said, pushing the envelope toward him. "According to the validated will, all assets in your mother's name, including the house and land in Hope Creek, legally pass to you. Here are the property documents, already in your name. And these," he pointed to the keys, "are the keys to the house in town." Sarah stared at those keys as if they were cursed pieces of metal. The key to all the secrets. When the lawyer left, leaving behind a crushing stillness, Sarah finally spoke. Her voice was flat, icy. "A month, Mark." He flinched. "Your mother died a month ago, and you said nothing to me." It wasn't a question. It was a naked accusation. Mark looked up. In his eyes, the supposed grief was now mixed with panic. "Sarah, I can explain. I was devastated. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want you to suffer." "You lied to me," she cut him off. "You went to the town 3 months ago with your shoes full of mud. You didn't go to supervise any construction, did you? You went because your mother was sick." He hesitated. "Yes, Mom was sick. I took her to the hospital. I didn't want to worry you." "And why didn't you tell me she died?" Sarah insisted, her voice breaking with anger and pain. "I am your wife. I am her daughter-in-law. I couldn't even pray for her the day she was buried." "That's exactly why," Mark burst out, standing up. "I didn't want you to see her like that. The house was a disaster. The renovation unfinished. I was embarrassed. I didn't want you to remember my mother in the middle of a ruin. The renovation again." Even in the face of death, Mark hid behind the same alibi. He took the envelope and the keys and locked himself in his office. Sarah heard the click of the desk drawer lock, securing those keys and all his secrets with them. She sank onto the sofa, feeling an immense sorrow for Mrs. Rose, a woman she barely knew, and an even more bitter grief for her marriage. That day, she understood that the man she had been sleeping with for 8 years was, in fact, a stranger. 4 days passed after the lawyer's visit, and they were the 4 longest days of the marriage. The house filled with a thick, almost tangible silence. Mark, after his dramatic outburst, now behaved like a heartbroken widower. He spent long periods staring at the turned-off television. He would get lost in his thoughts when he thought Sarah wasn't watching, but she was watching everything, and all she saw was fear. There was no real pain in his eyes, but nervousness, a worry that his mask might fall. Sarah transformed. Something in her broke, but something else hardened. She continued with her chores. She made his coffee in the morning, cooked dinner, washed his clothes. But she did it with an almost mechanical efficiency, without chatter, without a smile. She had become a spectator in her own home, studying Mark's every gesture and waiting for an opportunity. The opportunity came on the 5th day. During breakfast, Mark cleared his throat and set his spoon down on the plate with a gesture that was too calculated. "Sarah?" he said, adopting a serious tone. "A last-minute work trip has come up, a project in another region. I might be away for a week, maybe 10 days. I'm leaving tomorrow morning." It was too perfect a coincidence. Sarah felt a slight pulse in her temples. His mother had died a month ago, a fact he had hidden. And now, just as the inheritance appeared, he needed to get away. "Oh," was all she said in an icy voice. Mark became uncomfortable. Perhaps he expected tears, pleas for him not to leave her alone in her grief. "I tried to say no, but my boss won't allow it. It's an important project. Will you be okay if I leave you alone?" he asked with a thread of hope. "I'll be fine," Sarah replied. "Go and finish your work, Mark." He seemed to sigh with relief, too much relief. "Thank you, my love. I'll call you every day, I promise." The rest of the day, Sarah watched him pack his suitcase. She saw him pick out shirts with an energy that didn't match someone overwhelmed by grief. She heard him humming while he folded his pants. She caught him smiling at his phone. That smile sent a chill down her spine. That night, Mark went to bed early, saying he needed to rest for the flight. Sarah didn't sleep a wink. She lay stiff beside him, listening to his steady breathing and thinking that this man, the same one who had shared her bed for 8 years, lived surrounded by lies so thick she could no longer see through them. The pain had turned into a cold, pure anger that gave her strength. At 5 in the morning, Mark's alarm went off. He moved quickly in the dim light, showered, dressed, grabbed his briefcase, and leaned over to kiss Sarah's forehead, who pretended to be half asleep. His lips felt cold against her skin. "I'm leaving now. Take care of the house," he whispered. Sarah mumbled something indistinct. She heard the drag of the suitcase, the front door opening and closing, the car engine starting and then fading into the distance until silence took over the house. Then she opened her eyes wide. She didn't wait a minute. She jumped up. Her heart was pounding, not with fear, but with the clear sense that the time had come. Her target was Mark's office, forbidden territory, which he always made sure to lock when he wasn't inside. The doorknob didn't turn. It was locked, as expected. Sarah wasn't discouraged. She knew Mark was organized, but also vain and overconfident. He would never think she would dare to go in. Where would he keep a spare key? An idea struck her, and she ran to the laundry room where the basket with his used work pants from the previous week was. She searched the pockets one by one. Nothing in the gray pants. Nothing in the beige ones. In the black pair, her fingers touched something hard and cold in the small side pocket. She pulled out a tiny silver key. It was a drawer key. That was half a victory, but she still needed to get into the office. Sarah slumped for a moment in the hallway, frustrated, turning the little key between her fingers. Then she looked towards the front entrance of the house. There, on the typical key rack next to the door, hung the spare sets in neat order: car keys, front door key, gate key, and among them, the key to the office. Mark was so sure of his superiority that he never imagined she would use them. With trembling hands, Sarah took the spare keys, went back to the office, and opened the door. The smell of the room hit her immediately, a mix of paper, expensive cologne, and power. Everything was immaculate: a wooden desk, full bookshelves, a leather chair. She went straight to the desk, to the 3 drawers on the right. The top one wouldn't budge. Locked. She inserted the small silver key. It fit perfectly. The drawer opened silently. The first thing she saw was that old keychain. The keys the lawyer had left a few days ago for the house in Hope Creek. Sarah took them. They were cold, heavy, with complex teeth. As she was about to close the drawer, she saw a blue file folder underneath. On the cover, written in Mark's neat handwriting, it read, "Renovation, House, Town." Her heart hammered against her chest. She opened it. There were no blueprints or architect's estimates, only dozens, perhaps hundreds, of receipts. Receipts for the purchase of construction materials: 100 bags of cement, 5 truckloads of sand, 50 iron bars, cans of paint, tiles, all issued by the same hardware store in the city with dates carefully spread out at the end of each month for 7 years. It was too perfect, too symmetrical. It wasn't the real mess of a construction site, but the polished accounting of a carefully constructed lie. Among the receipts, hidden almost at random, was a small note, a piece of paper torn from a notebook in a handwriting that was not Mark's. It was a slanted, nervous script, clearly feminine. It said only, "He ran out of his medicine again. He needs it." Sarah clutched the paper in her hand. What medicine? Who? He. Who had written this? The renovation no longer had anything to do with construction workers. There was something darker. She put the keys to the townhouse in an inner pocket of her clothing, returned the folder and the small key to their place, closed the drawer, locked the office, and hung the house keys back where they were. There was no trace of her intrusion. Standing in the living room, with the cold keychain in her pocket, she felt the fear fade away. All that was left inside was determination. She gave herself an hour to prepare. She couldn't risk Mark calling and sensing something strange in her voice. She had to sound normal. She showered. She performed the dawn prayer with a forced concentration, thinking the whole time about the keys hidden against her chest. And then she packed. She didn't take a suitcase. It would have attracted too much attention. She took an old backpack she used for her religious studies classes and put in 2 long tunics, matching headscarves, underwear, a prayer set, and most importantly, all the cash she had, both in her wallet and in a secret drawer. She wasn't going to use credit cards. Any bank transaction could be traced. She grabbed her phone, hesitated for a moment, and came to a conclusion. If she turned it off, Mark would get suspicious and might decide to come back early. She left it on, in silent mode. If he called, she just wouldn't answer and would later send a casual message. I was in the shower. I fell asleep. It would be enough. She requested a rideshare to the intercity bus terminal, not the train station. Trains have more cameras, more records. The bus terminal, with its noisy chaos, was the best place to become invisible. The ride to the terminal felt surreal. Sitting in the back seat, she watched the city wake up, people rushing to their jobs, children with backpacks heading to school, street vendors starting their day. Sarah felt like she was detaching from her own life, as if, instead of being a quiet housewife, she were a fugitive. But she wasn't fleeing the law. She was fleeing a lie. At the terminal, she bought a cheap bus ticket to the city nearest to Hope Creek, not to the town itself. She didn't want the name of her exact destination to appear on any record. She paid in cash and took a seat by the window. The bus filled up quickly, smelling of a mixture of sweat, food, and gasoline. Sarah didn't mind. As the vehicle started moving, leaving the city's hustle and bustle behind, she felt a strange relief. It was the first time in a long while that she was out of Mark's direct reach and his poisoned explanations. The journey lasted about 5 hours. 5 hours she spent watching the landscape scroll by. Buildings replaced by green fields, smog by cleaner air, the dense city asphalt by tree-lined roads. In her head, the pieces were trying to fit together. Mark said the house was destroyed under total renovation, but all the materials purchased were, according to the receipts, from the city. The note mentioned medicine. The lawyer said Mrs. Rose had died in the hospital from a kidney problem. Was that true? Or had Mrs. Rose died in agony at home? Who was the woman who wrote the note, and who was the medicine for? When the bus arrived in the main city, Sarah got off and headed to the area where the rural shuttle vans waited. She asked a driver where she could get transportation to Hope Creek. The man looked at her and replied, "Hope Creek? Sure, a blue van leaves from over there. It's a well-known town," he said, pointing to the vehicle. Sarah was surprised. It didn't seem like a remote backwater as Mark had always described. She got into the van, which was full of women returning from the market with baskets of vegetables. One of them, a kind-faced woman, sat next to her. A little later, Sarah worked up the courage. "Excuse me, ma'am. Do you know where Mrs. Rose's house is?" "Mark's mother," she asked without giving too many details. The woman looked at her immediately with a mixture of curiosity and compassion in her eyes. "Oh, the poor dear. And who are you to her? It's been over a month since we lost her." Sarah felt a lump in her throat and lied. "I'm a distant relative." She was ashamed to say she was the daughter-in-law who hadn't even shown up for the wake. "Well, you get off at the corner of the community hall, go straight, and enter the alley next to the little shop. The house at the end, the one painted white, with a really pretty garden." That was her house, the woman explained in detail. "Pretty garden, white house," Sarah repeated to herself. "Thank you," she murmured. She got off at the indicated corner, and the town air hit her face. Clean, quiet, very different from the image of an isolated place with terrible roads that Mark had painted. She followed the directions, saw the shop, turned into the alley, and walked on a well-laid cobblestone path, flanked by tidy houses. At the end of the alley, she saw it. The house. And her feet froze to the ground. It was not a house in ruins, nor was it surrounded by bags of cement and dust. It was beautiful, much prettier than the house where she and Mark lived in the city. It had a modern yet cozy style. Immaculate ivory-colored walls, large windows with polished wooden frames. In front, an almost perfect garden. A lawn like a carpet, rose bushes, orchids, and jasmine in bloom. There were no piles of sand, no stacked bricks, no noise of workers. Not even a speck of dust. Sarah felt nauseous. 7 years of stories about collapsing roofs and weakened structures, and what stood before her was a postcard from a magazine. Mark hadn't been hiding a ruin out of shame. He was hiding a perfect house. Why didn't he want her to see it? What were the renovation receipts for? What had he really spent that construction money on? With trembling hands, Sarah reached into her inner pocket and closed her fingers around the cold metal of the large key. She pushed the gate, which wasn't even locked, and walked up to the porch. Her heart was beating so hard she feared it could be heard from inside. She inserted the key into the front door. It turned smoothly, as if it had been recently oiled. The lock yielded with an almost friendly click. The door was unlocked, but she couldn't push it open. Her legs felt as heavy as cement. She was on the threshold of a new life or a nightmare. What was she going to find? An empty house? Remnants of illness? Or something much worse? At that moment, a voice made her jump. "Are you looking for someone, dear?" The voice came from the side. Sarah spun around. Behind a hedge that separated that house from the next, a middle-aged woman in a patterned housecoat and a simple scarf on her head was looking at her curiously. She was holding a pair of pruning shears. Sarah swallowed hard. She couldn't run. "Yes," she stammered. "I'm looking for Mrs. Rose's house." The woman's brow furrowed with sorrow. "Oh, you poor thing. This was her house. It's been over a month since she passed. And who are you?" Sarah debated for a second, considering the lie she had used in the van, but she realized it wouldn't get her anywhere. "I'm Sarah, ma'am. I'm Mark's wife." The woman's jaw seemed to drop. The shears almost fell from her hand. "Mark's wife," she repeated, her voice sharp with surprise. "Yes. Is something wrong?" The neighbor shook her head, still stunned. "My goodness. I'm Teresa, dear, your next-door neighbor. Call me Mrs. Teresa. It's just, we all here thought Mark's wife was very sick." Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Very sick?" "Yes," Mrs. Teresa nodded, lowering her voice. "Mark always told us that his wife in the city was gravely ill, that it was a rare disease, that she couldn't be around dust, or get tired, or suffer any stress. That's why, according to him, you could never come to town." We all felt sorry for him, the poor man torn between a sick wife in the city and a sick mother here. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. The lie was expanding, covering everything. "And Mrs. Rose, what was she sick with?" she asked, her voice raspy. Teresa's face darkened. "Well, that's the strange thing. She was fine. She used to come with me to the community meetings. Then suddenly, about 2 years ago, she just disappeared, as if she'd been locked up. We, her neighbors, tried to visit her, but Mark would always show up just in time. Mom's resting. She can't see anyone. The doctor says she mustn't catch anything. Always excuses, and he put up this high gate, you see, which wasn't there before. Said it was for security, but it looked more like a prison." Sarah felt a cold emptiness in her stomach. "So she died of an illness," Teresa sighed. "According to Mark, from a kidney problem, but no one saw her sick. We just suddenly learned she had died. He organized the funeral very quickly without bothering many people. Said he didn't want to give the news to his wife because you were too fragile to handle the shock." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. Mark had not only excluded her from the funeral, he had used her as an excuse. "And the famous renovation of the house?" she dared to ask, pointing to the impeccable garden and freshly painted walls. Mrs. Teresa let out a short, bitter laugh. "Renovation? He had this house painted about 5 years ago, and that's it. No workers, no dust. What we did see were delivery trucks almost every week. Expensive furniture, new sofas, wardrobes, beds. And the strangest thing was..." She hesitated. "Please tell me," Sarah begged. "The strangest thing was the packages of toys, little bicycles, dolls, toy cars, stuffed animals, lots of them. I asked once, and Mark told me they were donations for an orphanage, and of course, one believes." A pounding started in Sarah's head. Toys. The note about the medicine. "And at night?" Teresa added, lowering her voice to a whisper. Sometimes you'd hear voices, not Mrs. Rose's soft voice. No, the voice of another, much younger woman, laughing, arguing quietly with Mark. And sometimes you could hear a child's voice. Sarah turned pale. I thought I was imagining it, Teresa said quickly, but it happened several times. In the morning, the house was always silent. We only knew Mrs. Rose was inside and that Mark came and went in his fancy car. The neighbor looked at Sarah with pity. I didn't know that you didn't know anything, dear. Sarah shook her head slowly, tears now streaming down her face. I didn't know anything. Teresa sighed. I don't want to meddle any further, but that house belongs to your mother-in-law. You have a right to go in. If anything happens, just scream. I'll be right here. She left her alone in front of the half-open door. Sarah wiped her tears with the back of her hand, took a deep breath, and pushed. The door swung open silently. The first thing that greeted her was a current of cold air, too cold, as if the air conditioning was on full blast, mixed with a strange smell. An expensive jasmine air freshener, an undercurrent of disinfectant, and a stale heaviness of a poorly ventilated room. She was in the living room, and it didn't look like a townhouse at all. The floor was shiny, light marble, the sofa was enormous, made of white leather, and a gigantic television hung on a wall clad in wood panels. Everything looked brand new, polished, almost unused. It was, without a doubt, much more luxurious than the house where she lived in the city. Then her eyes fixed on the main wall of the living room. There were dozens of silver picture frames lined up with precision. Sarah approached slowly, her heart racing. In every photo was Mark. Mark smiling in front of the Eiffel Tower. Mark skiing on a mountain that looked like Japan. Mark with a golf trophy. Mark posing next to a sports car she had never seen. It was like an altar to his ego. There wasn't a single photo of Mrs. Rose, which hurt even more. There were also no photos of Sarah. Not their wedding, not her graduation, not a single casual picture of the two of them. In this house, on the walls that her mother-in-law was supposed to look at with pride, Mark and Sarah's marriage did not exist. As if it had never happened. Dazed, she crossed the living room and reached the dining room, where a table for 8 sat impeccably with an empty vase in the center. Then she went into the kitchen. It was a showroom kitchen, built-in stovetop, modern electric oven, a double-door refrigerator, all gleaming. On the refrigerator door, something broke the perfection. A child's drawing held up by a magnet. Sarah got closer. It was a crayon drawing of 3 figures holding hands under a smiling sun, a tall adult, a woman with long hair, and a small figure between them. Above the man's head in a child's clumsy handwriting was a misspelled but clear word, Daddy. The air caught in her throat. Daddy, not uncle, not mister, Daddy. She backed away from the kitchen and walked down the inner hallway. There were several doors. She opened the first, a tidy guest room with no signs of use. The second, an immaculate bathroom that smelled of eucalyptus. The third door, at the end of the hall, was locked. From its size, Sarah guessed it was the master bedroom, the one that should have been Mrs. Rose's. She took the keychain from her pocket, separated the smallest key, and tried it with trembling fingers. It took her 3 tries to get it into the slot, but finally, it turned. The click of the lock echoed in her chest like a gunshot. She opened it. The smell hit her like a slap in the face. It wasn't the cold perfume of the living room, but the concentrated stench of medicine, alcohol, disinfectant, and sickness. The kind of smell that clings to the walls of rooms where someone has been ill for too long. The light was dim. Thick curtains blocked the sun. When her eyes adjusted, she saw the scene. In the middle of the room, on the marble floor, was a metal hospital bed with side rails. There was no wooden bed with a nice quilt, but a clinical gurney, now empty. The plastic-covered mattress was bare. In a corner, an IV stand stood like an abandoned skeleton. On the bedside table, empty bottles, syrups, and blister packs of pills were piled up. Boxes of medicine. A small oxygen tank lay on the floor with its hose unattached. This had been Mrs. Rose's prison. Sarah felt a wave of rage and compassion. There, locked in an expensive but suffocating room, the woman she had wanted to know as a mother had spent her final years. "Oh my God, Rose," she murmured, tears rolling down her cheeks. But that was only half of the room. The space was very large and seemed to be divided into two areas. The bed area was somber, almost clinical. The other half. Sarah took a few more steps, wiping her eyes. When she looked up, she almost fainted. The wall opposite the bed wasn't white. It was painted a soft pastel blue and was covered from top to bottom with photos. Not the same narcissistic photos from the living room. These were family photos. In all of them was Mark, but this time he wasn't alone. In every picture, he was hugging a young, pretty woman with long, loose hair, without a headscarf. He was smiling radiantly. Next to them was a little boy of about 4 or 5, with eyes and a smile identical to Mark's. There were pictures at the beach with the boy on Mark's shoulders, pictures at a birthday party with both adults kissing the child's cheeks, pictures in the same living room she had just walked through, the three of them on the white leather sofa, hugging like a perfect family. And then she saw the cruelest photo of all. It was a picture taken in that very room. Mark, the woman, and the boy were posing, smiling, at the foot of the hospital bed. Behind them, on the mattress, lay Mrs. Rose, thin, wasted away, with an empty look in her eyes. Her body was merely a backdrop, a sad decoration for her son's false happiness. Sarah felt the world go dark. There, on that wall, was the answer to 7 years of excuses. Mark had another family. The renovation was nothing more than the process of remodeling his own life, building a secret home with another woman and a son he never mentioned. All paid for with the money he claimed to be investing in his mother's house. And Mrs. Rose, the rightful owner of that house, had been forced to witness it, locked up next to that wall. Sarah staggered back to the doorway. She collapsed onto the cold hallway floor, unable to cry, unable to breathe. She didn't know how long she stayed there. 10 minutes, an hour. Time lost its shape. Finally, the shock began to subside, leaving room for something hard, sharp, that settled in the center of her chest. Anger. This was no longer just a marital betrayal. It was an indescribable cruelty. He had turned his mother's home and her old age into a stage for his double life. With clumsy but determined movements, Sarah stood up. She was not going to faint or run away. She had already opened that door. Now she had to see it through to the end. She went back into the room. She looked at the empty bed, imagining Mrs. Rose there, breathing with difficulty, listening to laughter on the other side of the blue wall. Then she looked at the photos. There were so many, and they were so obscene in their happiness that they made her stomach churn. On an impulse, she began to tear them down, one by one. She didn't care if the frames shattered on the floor. She needed proof. She was going to leave this house with more than just rage. As she ripped down a large photo, the one from the birthday, she saw something on the bedside table. The drawers were closed. She dropped the frame. The glass shattered. She opened the first drawer. More bottles of vitamins and painkillers, nothing that looked like strong kidney medication. Another lie. The second drawer. Sterile syringes, cotton, alcohol. The third was full to the brim. On top were stacked adult diapers. Sarah paused for a second. That squeezed her heart. This was how they had managed the most intimate and humiliating part of Mrs. Rose's illness. She pushed the diapers aside. Underneath, she found a worn school notebook. She recognized it. It was the kind of cheap notebook children use for writing. She pulled it out, her hands trembling for a new reason. She opened it. On the first page was a date from 3 years ago and a shaky but neat handwriting, the script of an older woman. Today, Mark told me he's going to renovate the house. He wants me to spend my last years in comfort. God bless him. What a good son. I love him so much. Sarah swallowed hard. She turned the page. Months later, another entry. The house is beautiful. Much lovelier than I imagined. But it's strange. Mark had a very high gate put up and says I shouldn't go out alone, that I might fall. I obey. He knows best. The entries became more spaced out. 2 years ago. Mark brought a visitor, a young woman, very pretty. He said her name is Claire, that she's a work colleague and is having problems, that she needs to stay here for a while. He put her in the guest room. But Mark told the neighbor that I'm the one who's sick. I'm fine. I don't understand. Sarah's heart pounded even harder. Claire. The smiling face from the photos now had a name. She turned more pages. 1.5 years ago. Claire brought a child, a beautiful little boy named Brian. Mark told me he's an orphan, that they're helping him. But the boy's eyes are the same as Mark's when he was little. I'm not a fool. I gave birth to him. Sarah's tears fell onto the yellowed paper. She kept reading. Mark got angry when I asked if the boy was his. He yelled at me, said I'm old and delusional. He forbade me from ever speaking of it again. Since then, he locks the door from the outside. He says it's for my own good, that there are too many germs outside. Claire and the boy roam free in my house, and I'm locked in. The handwriting became more irregular, with crooked words, as if the hand was weak. On the last pages, the tone was desperate. My heart pills are gone. Mark took them. He brought me others that he says are better, but my chest is tight. I asked Claire for help, but she's afraid. She's a prisoner too. Mark brought a lawyer. He wants me to sign a power of attorney so that everything will be in his name. I refused. I threw the pen at him. He threatened to hurt you, Sarah. He said something could happen to you in the city if I didn't obey. God forgive me. He used your name to scare me. Sarah had to cover her mouth with her hand to keep from screaming. Mark had used her life as a weapon against his own mother. She read the last entry, written in almost illegible strokes. He is not my son anymore. The devil has taken him. He locks me up, brings another woman into my house, lets me die slowly. Sarah, if you read this, forgive me for not being a good mother-in-law. I ask you for one thing. Punish him. Don't let him win. Sarah, help me. She hugged the notebook to her chest and burst into tears, not for her marriage, but for Mrs. Rose, for her loneliness, her fear, her undignified end. She cried until there were no tears left. Then, as if those words, punish him, were seared into her skin, she wiped her face brusquely. Grief had to give way to justice. She remembered the small note she had found in Mark's office. He ran out of his medicine again. He needs it. She went back to the drawer of diapers and rummaged through it. She found several more notes, all in the same modern handwriting of Claire. Shopping lists, formula for Brian, diapers for Brian, size M fever syrup for Brian. She understood. The medicine in the note wasn't for Mrs. Rose, but for Mark's illegitimate son. He cared more about a simple children's syrup than his own mother's heart medication. Sarah gathered everything. Mrs. Rose's notebook, Claire's notes, several photos torn from the wall showing Mark, Claire, and Brian, united as a family, and one particular photo where Mrs. Rose could be seen in the background, confined to the bed. She left that room, closing the door firmly behind her. She walked through the hallway, past the kitchen and the luxurious living room, without looking at anything else. That house was not a home. It was a mausoleum of lies. She opened the front door, stepped out into the open air, and breathed in the town's sunshine as if it were her first breath of air in days. She clutched the notebook and photos so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She knew exactly what she had to do. She immediately crossed over to Mrs. Teresa's house. There was no time for pleasantries. "I need your help," she said with an icy calm. Teresa read in her eyes that she had seen something terrible and let her in. She sat her down in the humble but cool living room. "What did you find, dear?" she asked anxiously. Sarah stared straight ahead. "I'm poisoned by his lies, but Mrs. Rose." "They killed her," she whispered. "They locked her up, took away her medicine, and let her die while my husband lived here with another woman and his son." Teresa let out a choked gasp. "God help us." Sarah opened the notebook on the table. "It's all here, and I need to call the lawyer who came to my house, Mr. Ramirez. I don't have his number, but I remember the name of the law firm. May I please use your phone?" Teresa pointed to the landline phone resting on a small table. "Of course, dear. Use whatever you need." With her cell phone, Sarah looked up the number for Ramirez and Associates online and dialed it from Teresa's phone. "Ramirez and Associates, good afternoon," a receptionist answered. "I need to speak with Mr. Ramirez. It's urgent. Tell him it's Sarah, Mark's wife and Mrs. Rose's daughter-in-law." There was a brief silence. "One moment, please." Sarah's heart was racing. Finally, she heard the voice she remembered. "Mrs. Sarah!" The lawyer sounded surprised. How did you get my number? Are you all right? I'm in Hope Creek, Sarah replied in a firm tone. At Mrs. Rose's house. He let out a sigh of astonishment. At the house in town? Mark told me you were very delicate and that he was away on a business trip. Mark lies, she interrupted him. He lies about everything, sir. I've been inside the house. I found proof that Mrs. Rose didn't simply die from her illness. My husband locked her up, denied her medicine, and let her die while he lived here with his mistress and a son. It's all written down by her. A heavy silence fell on the other end of the line. Sarah could almost imagine the lawyer putting a hand to his forehead. I suspected it, he finally murmured. Not like this, not something so terrible, but something didn't add up. What did you suspect? Sarah asked. 2 months before she died, Mrs. Rose called me secretly. She was very scared. She told me Mark was pressuring her to sign over power of attorney for all her assets. She wanted to change the will. She didn't want him to receive anything. She wanted her entire inheritance to go to you, her daughter-in-law, the only person she trusted despite barely seeing you. She asked me for help to legally modify the will. Sarah gripped the receiver. The notebook wasn't lying. I was preparing the documentation when suddenly Mark came to my office saying his mother was very ill and couldn't receive visitors or sign anything else. A month later, he called to tell me she had died. He brought me the signed power of attorney and the old will. I knew something was wrong, but without proof. We have it now, Sarah said. The notebook explains everything. It talks about threats using my name, about signing under duress. I also have proof of the other family, of how he used the house, how he isolated his mother. The lawyer's tone changed. It became cold, decisive. Listen to me very carefully, Mrs. Sarah. Do not call the police yet. Mark is cunning. If he suspects we've found him out, he might run or destroy evidence. I will head out there right now with a team and whatever emergency warrant we can get. The trip will take us about 4 or 5 hours. Stay at Mrs. Teresa's house. Do not go back to Mrs. Rose's house alone. And most importantly, do not speak to Mark. There's something else, Sarah added. Mark isn't on a trip as he claims. He's not in another region. She looked at Teresa, who nodded, understanding the gesture. He's nearby. Teresa took the phone for a moment. Mr. Ramirez, this is Teresa, Mrs. Rose's neighbor. Mark hasn't gone anywhere. He has another house in the next town over, in Brighton Hills. A big, new house for that woman he's living with. Every time he tells Sarah he's on a business trip, he's there. And when he tells that woman he's going to the city, he goes to be with Sarah. He's a two-headed snake, she summed up bluntly. The silence on the other end was even longer. The lawyer was piecing the puzzle together. This is better in a way, he finally said. We can catch him red-handed. Mrs. Sarah, Mrs. Teresa, lock your door and wait. Do not go out. When I arrive, we will go to Brighton Hills together and flush him out of his den. We'll be waiting, Sarah replied. She hung up and sank onto the sofa, the notebook on her lap. Teresa looked at her with a mixture of horror and admiration. You are a strong woman, dear, she murmured. I don't know, Mrs. Teresa, Sarah replied, not taking her eyes off the notebook. I just know I want justice for Mrs. Rose. The 5 hours of waiting felt eternal. Sarah didn't eat a bite, although Teresa insisted. A cup of hot tea sat beside her, slowly cooling. She remained seated, rigid, reading her mother-in-law's diary over and over, memorizing every line of pain, every plea, until the words were branded in her mind like iron. Every time fear tried to rise in her chest, she would open it again to the last entry. Sarah, punish him. Don't let him win. That plea became her armor. Mrs. Teresa kept pacing back and forth, peeking through the curtain from time to time, afraid that Mark might appear. Outside, the sun began to set over the course of the afternoon, oblivious to the storm that was brewing. Finally, around 4 in the afternoon, they heard engines. Not one, but 2 cars stopped in front of Teresa's house. She looked out and exclaimed, "They're here!" Sarah stood up, her legs no longer trembling. She clutched the notebook to her chest. There was a firm knock on the door. Teresa opened it. On the threshold stood Mr. Ramirez, red from the heat and contained rage, his suit jacket in his hand and his shirt sleeves rolled up. Behind him were two sturdy men dressed in sober uniform shirts. "Mrs. Sarah?" the lawyer greeted her. "We're here. We've already spoken with the town's police station. These gentlemen are officers." Sarah nodded. "What's the plan?" "We're going to Brighton Hills right now. First, we want to see with our own eyes what's happening there. I recommend you stay here." "I'm going," she interrupted him. "I need him to see me. I need him to know that it was my hand that brought his lie crashing down." The lawyer looked her in the eyes. He saw not fragility, but an unexpected strength. "All right," he conceded, "but you stay behind us." The drive to Brighton Hills was short, barely 20 minutes. Sarah rode in the lawyer's car with Teresa. The police followed in the other vehicle. No one spoke. Sarah watched the fields, the scattered houses, the sky beginning to turn orange through the window. Upon arriving, Teresa pointed. "It's that one, the one with the low gate and the toys in the yard." Mark's house there was the opposite of Mrs. Rose's. It wasn't hidden, it was on display. Modern gray walls with orange accents, a front garden with a swing set, scattered tricycles, a plastic playhouse. It was the picture of a happy young family. They stopped a few yards away, and there he was. Mark, in a polo shirt and shorts, looking younger, more relaxed, laughing as he pushed the swing where a little boy, Brian, was giggling. On the terrace, sitting in a chair, was Claire, the woman from the photos, with a glass of a cold drink in her hand, smiling calmly. It was an almost perfect scene, if not for the fact that the ground beneath their feet was built on Mrs. Rose's grave. Sarah opened the car door before the lawyer could say anything. "Mrs. Sarah, wait," he called out, but she was already walking towards the gate with a steady stride. Mark heard the crunch of gravel and turned, still with a smile on his face. When he saw Sarah, the smile froze, then vanished. For a second, he looked as if he'd seen a ghost. The swing came back and almost hit Brian, who shrieked in surprise. "Sarah," Mark whispered, his voice dry. On the terrace, Claire stood up, confused. "Who is that, Mark?" she asked, not understanding. Mark didn't answer. Sarah stopped in front of him, separated only by the swing set. Brian looked at her curiously, with those eyes that were a copy of his father's. "You said," Sarah began, her voice clear and cold, "that you were on a business trip far away. You said you'd be gone for 10 days. He swallowed. "Sarah, This isn't what it looks like. I can explain." "Oh, really?" she laughed dryly. "What do you want to explain first? The 7-year renovation? The fake receipts? Your supposedly terminally ill wife in the city?" Claire put a hand to her mouth, walked down from the porch, and took a few steps closer. "Mark, what is she saying? You told me your wife was dead, that you were a widower." Sarah finished the thought without taking her eyes off him. "My name is Sarah. I am alive, and I am his legal wife." Claire turned pale. Her knees buckled slightly. No. You told me she died in an accident." Mark panicked. His eyes darted from one woman to the other. "Claire, don't listen to her. Sarah, please, let's go inside and talk. Don't make a scene." He tried to touch Sarah's arm. She pulled away as if he were poison. "Don't touch me." Her voice rose for the first time, loaded with years of pain and disgust. At that moment, Mr. Ramirez and the officers approached. Mark saw them, and his instinct was to back away. "Who are you people? This is my business, my family's business." "Family business?" Sarah repeated, taking a step toward him. "Locking up your mother, taking away her medicine? Letting her die while you play happy family with your mistress and your son?" "Is that family business?" Mark shouted. "You're crazy. You're making things up." Sarah held up the notebook she was carrying. "Did I make this up too?" With all her strength, she threw it at his chest. The notebook hit Mark and fell open at his feet, revealing Mrs. Rose's trembling handwriting. "Your mother sends her regards from the grave, Mark," Sarah said in a sharp whisper. "Take him away," Mr. Ramirez ordered, controlling his anger. The two officers lunged at Mark and grabbed his arms. "Let go of me! You have no right! I haven't done anything!" he roared, struggling like a cornered animal. "Mr. Mark," the lawyer said in an official voice, "I am Mr. Ramirez, legal representative for Mrs. Rose. You are being detained for questioning regarding document forgery, misappropriation of family assets, and deliberate neglect of a person under your care, resulting in their death." Claire screamed and collapsed onto the lawn, hugging Brian, who was crying, frightened to see his father being held by strangers. Mark locked eyes with Sarah as they dragged him towards the police car. There was no remorse, only hatred. "You!" he spat. "You are ruining my life!" Sarah held his gaze without flinching. "No, Mark. You did this. You ruined your life, your mother's life, and you destroyed mine. Now you're just reaping what you sowed." She watched him being pushed into the car. The door slammed shut with a definitive thud. Dust kicked up as the vehicle drove off, taking away the man who had been her husband and was now just the face of a crime. The silence that followed was strange, broken only by Claire's sobs and Brian's choked crying. Sarah remained standing, feeling exhaustion creep over her as the adrenaline began to fade. The lawyer approached her. "Are you all right, Mrs. Sarah?" he asked seriously. She nodded. She walked over to Claire, who was still on the ground, curled in a ball around the child. She knelt in front of her. "What exactly did he tell you?" she asked in a softer voice. "I need to know how far his lies spread." Claire looked up, her eyes swollen, her makeup smeared. He said his name was Mark Harris. That he was a businessman, a widower, that his wife died years ago, that Mrs. Rose was sick and senile, that she hated me and that's why I couldn't see her, that he controlled her medicine because she wouldn't cooperate. Her voice broke. Sarah glanced at the lawyer. "He deceived you like he deceived everyone," she said. "He used you to complete his masterpiece. You, me, Brian, Mrs. Rose. We were all just pieces in his play. Now you have a choice. You can keep supporting his lies, or you can tell the truth and help bring about justice." A new fear filled Claire's eyes, but also a clarity. "What do I have to do?" "Be honest," the lawyer answered. "Testify to everything you know. How long have you lived here? What did he tell you about his wife? About his mother? What did you see? What medicines were in the house? What did he do with them? If you cooperate, it will count in your favor." Claire nodded, hugging Brian tightly, as if she were afraid they would take the child from her too. "I'll do it," she whispered. "I don't want to be an accomplice anymore." The case shook Hope Creek, Brighton Hills, and the city. The story soon hit the local papers and then the news broadcasts. Son locks up mother and lets her die to inherit her fortune. The investigation gathered everything Sarah and the lawyer had found. Mrs. Rose's diary became the key piece of evidence, describing the blackmail, the coercion to sign legal documents, and the substitution of her medicine. Claire's notes and the renovation receipts proved the diversion of family money to maintain the second home and the luxury of his parallel life. Teresa's testimony confirmed Mrs. Rose's forced isolation and the suspicious speed of the funeral. What ultimately sealed Mark's fate was Claire's testimony. In front of the judge, through tears, she recounted how Mark ignored Mrs. Rose's complaints of chest pain, how he told her that elderly people dramatized to get attention, how he had removed the heart pills from the bedside table and replaced them with simple vitamins, claiming she no longer needed them. She described hearing arguments between Mark and his mother when she refused to sign documents, how he would use Sarah's name as a threat. The judge also heard a reading of the diary's last entry. "That plea, Sarah, punish him." No one in the courtroom could remain indifferent. Mark, true to his role, tried everything. He hired expensive lawyers. He tried to portray Claire as a scheming liar. He wanted to paint his mother as mentally unstable. He cried on the stand, swearing he adored her and had done everything possible to care for her. But every dramatic gesture crashed against the weight of Mrs. Rose's notebook, the forged signatures, and the witnesses. In the end, the judge delivered the verdict. Guilty of document forgery, misappropriation of assets, and intentional neglect of a dependent person under his care, conduct that directly contributed to her death. 15 years in prison. In addition, the nullification of the power of attorney signed under duress, and the confiscation of the assets he had managed for his own benefit. The same day the sentence was made public, Sarah filed for divorce. She asked for no division of assets. She didn't want a single dollar tainted by what Mark had done. With Mr. Ramirez's help, she managed to revert the will that Mark had imposed. The court recognized the validity of Mrs. Rose's original wishes, the ones intended to benefit Sarah. Thus, the house and land in Hope Creek were transferred to the daughter-in-law's name, just as the deceased had desired in her final notes. The house in Brighton Hills, built with ill-gotten money, was seized by the state. Claire, for her cooperation, received a symbolic sentence and the chance to rebuild her life far from Mark. At Sarah's express request, the lawyer ensured that mother and son did not end up on the street, but in a small, decent apartment, enough to start over. A year passed. Hope Creek looked different, brighter. The house at the end of the alley, the one that had been a prison and the scene of a silent crime, had also changed. The high gate that looked like a prison wall was replaced by a low, well-kept hedge. The front door was kept open most of the day, letting in the town's air and the laughter of children. Sarah, wearing a tunic in pastel shades, was now watering the flowers in the garden, jasmine, roses, geraniums. She had decided not to return to the city. Her peace was there, in the house of the woman she never got to know in life as she would have wished, but whom she now honored in every corner. Inside, the smell of disinfectant and confinement had long since disappeared. In the living room, there was no trace left of Mark's photos. She had burned them all. In their place hung calligraphies with verses and phrases that invited reflection and peace. The room where Mrs. Rose had been imprisoned had been completely transformed. The hospital bed had been removed, the walls repainted in a soft ivory tone, the curtains replaced with light ones that let in the sun. Where there once stood an IV stand and an oxygen tank, there were now shelves full of children's and young adult books, colorful rugs, and cushions on the floor. It was a small library. The children of the town came in barefoot or in sandals. They sat on the cushions, browsed through storybooks, read aloud, and shared laughs. Above the doorway of that room, Sarah had a simple but beautiful wooden plaque placed with hand-carved letters. The Mrs. Rose Library, Knowledge is Light. Every time she passed that sign, she felt something inside her settle a little more. One evening, Mrs. Teresa crossed the hedge with a tray of jasmine tea and freshly made donuts. "It's getting chilly, dear. Come inside before you catch a cold," she said with a smile. Sarah returned the smile, a clean smile that came from within. "In a moment, Mrs. Teresa. I like listening to the children from here," she replied, looking towards the open library from where the voices of children reading in chorus emerged. She had fulfilled Mrs. Rose's request. Mark was paying for what he had done, and that house, which had been a silent hell, had become a place where children sought stories and light. Sarah could finally breathe in peace. And every page turned in that small library was, in some way, a prayer for the woman who had asked her for justice from the final pages of a school notebook. If you made it to the end, tell me in the comments what you would have done in Sarah's place. And if you want to hear more dark stories like this, support this video with a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. What's coming next will be even more unsettling.